Welcome to today's episode of the Health Collective podcast. We're joined in this episode by Lesley Hossner. Lesley has been a language coach and trainer for over 25 years. She's worked in a variety of roles with all kinds of people and travelled extensively. And her main passion is helping people to learn languages by simplifying everything and giving them the confidence to actually have a go. In today's episode, some of the most interesting points were actually what are the keys to learning any language and how can we hack some of the ideas that we had as children, that ability to just absorb languages. How can we now bring that into adulthood in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond? We cover all sorts of areas, including mindset, tricks, habits, and little things that you can do on a daily basis to ensure that if you decide to learn a language, you follow through and get to that fluent native level that we all know we're striving for. So if you're looking to learn a language for work, pleasure, or for moving abroad, then make sure you listen to myself and Lesley in today's episode. Lesley, welcome to the show. Hope you're keeping well today.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very well. And thank you for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure. Now, what you do is probably a little bit different because I described you in the introduction as a language coach, and you have been for, over 25 years, which is a significant amount of time. So you've probably seen quite a lot of changes within that career, within yourself as a language coach as well. So could you maybe give the audience a little bit of an idea of what a language coach actually is or what a language coach does?
Yes, I mean, my career has changed over the 25 years. I've done other things as well. Basically, I help people to learn as opposed to teaching. So I'm not a traditional teacher. I firmly believe that people learn a language when they need to, when they have the motivation to. And I help to find the easiest way possible for them because we are programmed to learn languages. I basically like helping people to learn whatever they want to learn in the easiest way possible so that they can enjoy it. If they're enjoying it, they'll learn it. So that's a little bit about the language coach. It's not you do this and learn this and do some exercises. Very much not that way.
Okay. So alongside, if someone was, say, learning German or French or Mandarin, then a coach like yourself comes and works in tandem with that linguistic journey to help them absorb and progress. Would that be?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I will try and find tools that will help them learn for themselves because we can only learn for ourselves at the end of the day. So I'll find materials for them to listen to. I'll give them tips and hints on how they can make the language stick better, how they can learn to pronounce it, how they can take away the fear, because for a lot of people, a language is quite a scary thing. They remember French at school. If I had £1 for every time somebody said to me, either I'm no good at languages or I learned French for 5 years, can't say a word, I'd be incredibly rich.
So what do you see as some of because I'm guessing every individual has individual sticking points, but also the human condition usually means there are patterns amongst most of us. Yeah. So what do you usually see are the generic barriers or obstacles when it comes to learning languages as an adult?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is lack of confidence. And I think that's true for learning most things. People think they're no good. They think they're not good enough. They think they've had a go and they've failed. It's too hard. Somebody told them they weren't good at this. They were good at something else, maybe. So it's often self-imposed barriers. And there is an overarching belief, I think it's quite wrong, that English people are no good at languages, or we don't need to learn languages, which is neither of which are true, really. There's it's so good for everybody to know another language. It's good for the brain. It's good for cultural awareness, and it shows you're you're meeting someone halfway. So as far as I'm concerned, I think no knowledge is wasted. It gives you a better understanding of your own language as well. So, yeah, but definitely lack of confidence or fear of failing is the big one. Yeah.
You mentioned the word someone can learn a language when they need to. And obviously a need is a big driver. I mean,
Yes.
I know myself, I've traveled to countries where maybe Portugal, that it's not a widely spoken language. So everybody's English is perfect. Would you say that as a cultural identity, we feel that we don't need to learn languages anymore?
I think a lot of people, a lot of English, people who have English as a first language feel that. However, once they've experienced being able to connect with someone in their own language, for example, you say everybody speaks English perfectly in Portugal. There are lots of people in lots of little towns in Portugal where they don't. And you just can't have that connection so well. Even if you've only got a few of their words, you'll notice they light up when you try. So yeah, I think it's connection. When I say I work with people when they need to, it's often on a work-related basis or someone moving to the country because they realize there is a barrier if they can only speak in English. Because if you're speaking to someone in your own language and they're speaking in English, which is not their first language, there is a limit to what they can say to you, but also that they only have to tell you what they want to as well. So I also say sometimes we do like German or French for eavesdropping. So even if you're not confident in speaking, being able to understand what people are saying is really important, particularly in business meetings. Quite often if you're in a business meeting or a business setting, the meeting will be held in English just because even if there's one person in the room who is English, generally the default language will be English. But as soon as that meeting's finished, there will be conversations going on the side which are not in English. So it's useful just to be able to get the gist and find out what people are really saying and thinking. So the eavesdropping is it. And I'm just so nosy. I just love listening to what people are saying.
Love that. I love cultural eavesdropping. What a fantastic reason to learn a language, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Even if you're not confident enough to speak. And you will always understand more than you can say. I think that goes for our own language as well. Sometimes you may be reading or listening to a conversation and you think you know what a word means, but you're not quite confident enough to use it in your own conversation until you've looked it up. So I think that's pretty. I can't think of an occasion when you can say something that you don't understand. Yeah. That goes for most things.
Okay. So in terms of absorbing another language, there is clearly as a child, this is prime. Neurologically, there must be reasons as to why, as a child, up until a certain age, I'm guessing, it's much easier. You know, I have a niece and a nephew who speak English and German. Ironically, when they get angry, they all speak German. But they'll go between the two, regardless of sort of who they're with. It kind of just depends on the natural flow. They're bilingual. At what age does that ability to just absorb stop? And is there any way of hijacking or hacking yourself neurologically to kind of progress as you did as a kid? Or is it just you have to accept that as an adult is a tougher journey towards that learning?
That's a really interesting question. I've heard all sorts of ages muted. I think it's generally accepted that up until about the age of 7, human beings can make the full range of linguistic sounds. But generally, if someone moves to a country before puberty or before they're sort of 13, 14, they can become as fluent as a native speaker. But having said that, I know people who've moved when they've been older. I think the key is listening and mimicking, having as much input as you can. But yes, it's much easier if you've done it before the age of, say, 10. I think that would be we can't put the clock back, whatever we do. You can just create the best conditions for someone, and it's unlikely that you won't have an accent. But then people speaking English generally have an accent, unless they've been living here for a long time, or they're particularly gifted, or have a family situation where they've been learning. But it doesn't matter. I mean, it all adds to the cultural mix, doesn't it? And as long as you're understood, I think the aim is not to be perfect, it's to say something. So as you say, done is better than perfect. Having a go, getting your message across is way, way better than waiting until you think in your head that you're perfect. So I try and get people talking and having a go. And I'll give them things, and we'll practice in a safe space before they go out and do it. Which is another important aspect.
You kind of mentioned or touched upon maybe the English identity when it comes to languages, but do you, because I know that you travel a lot, have you seen any cultural indicators in other countries about how other people view us as Brits in general? And what comes to mind is, for instance, going to Paris. I am pretty terrible at French, but I can get by. I definitely have an English accent, but I will do my best.
Yes.
And whenever I would start a conversation or ask for an order or anything in French, automatically the response would then be in English, because they would be able to tell. So do you see any sort of specific responses towards English people attempting to talk a native language when it comes to different countries?
I think this happens a lot, and I don't necessarily think it's a criticism. I mean, a lot of people I know take it personally and as a criticism of their French or German. I think it's that people love to speak English. English is very much a cool language, and that they really like to practice. If you go somewhere that's not such a cosmopolitan place, so in a smaller town in France, you'll find that they're not so ready to speak English, or they can't, and that's when your French will come into its own. But yes, it does happen, and I think they're having free English lessons, as it were, or practice. So people do, or they're trying to be helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always taken it as helpful rather than an insult.
I think as long as we're polite in their own language, that goes a long way as well, particularly in France. Yeah.
So I've got to ask, how many languages do you speak?
Well, I think not that many, but I know how to learn them. So English, French, German, Spanish, and some Italian. So the basic European languages. I have had a dabble with Ukrainian, but I haven't quite applied myself to the alphabet and everything. So I've got quite a way to go.
Okay, so
I do get very frustrated when I can't speak any of the language when I'm away. I always try and learn a few words.
Do you find that there are certain links between certain languages that mean, for someone whose English is their native language, are there certain languages and links between them that make them easier or more challenging? You know, for instance, Mandarin, I would imagine, is far more challenging than French for an English person to learn. Is that mainly due to the alphabet, the actual letters themselves, or is there something deeper behind it?
I think with Mandarin and other Asian languages, it's because it's the sounds, it's a tonal language, and they will have a word, and I think there are 4 different tones, which mean 4 different things. And that is very hard for us even to hear, let alone replicate. So European languages, there are lots and lots of connections. It's much easier to learn because we either have a Greek or a Latin basis to it, and we can always find a word that means a similar thing. Personally, I find German is really, really easy. People are always saying how difficult German is, but we have so many common words in common and structures. It's very simple. I also love French because it was the first language I learned. It was the first place I went abroad to live, to stay, and I just think it sounds so beautiful. So yeah, and I love grammar. Actually, I don't force grammar onto people, but if they want to talk about it, I really enjoy it. As an sort of intellectual exercise, I find it quite fascinating how grammar works. But you don't need to know the grammar before you can speak. It's like taking a car manual before you learn to drive a car. First of all, you learn the practicalities, and then if you need to know how something works, then you look back at it. And that's how I see grammar. Grammar is learn some language first and then look at why is as it is. So people don't need, that's the other thing I hear. I can't even do English grammar. How can I learn French or German or Spanish? And really, I think most people learn more about English grammar once they've learned a language, because then they realize why things are as they are, and then they're less likely to make mistakes in English. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you speak about grammar. So one of the things that I've noted from a lot of people who have tried to learn a language and maybe given up, I see a lot of similarities between what I do and what you do, in that people will try to lose weight, do it really wholeheartedly for a few weeks and give up. And I've seen that with languages, really wholeheartedly and give up. So do people have this inane belief that it should move quicker? So for instance, in terms of weight, people want to see pounds drop off the scale to keep the motivation going. Is there a similar approach when it comes to languages, and can it create problems?
Yes, it is. Although with weight, you have a tangible measurement. I mean, I know that's not the most, certainly from what I know about health and fitness and weight loss, etc., the actual numbers on the scale are not really the most important measure, but they are there. They are there as a tangible. Much harder to measure a language. It's more about how you feel, how your confidence is, certain tasks you've achieved. But yes, it goes in peaks and troughs, exactly like weight. You can think you've made great progress, and then nothing happens for a while, and then you'll make another sort of leap forward. So really, it needs to be creating small habits. So to keep it moving forward. I've read. Have you read the book Tiny Habits and Atomic Habits? Yeah, it's that. It's creating habits that you can stick to, and it's like what you do, isn't it? It's not giving up, but just doing it a little bit every day. And if you can't do anything else with a language, listen to something. Listening is creating the neural pathways, and listening and reading at the same time is invaluable. It really is. And that very little of that happens when we learn in school. Mostly the only listening you do is for testing. You have that old listening exercise, but really what people need to be doing is being exposed to a lot of spoken language, just for learning and for pleasure, not for testing. And that's how we learn as children, isn't it? I mean, we listen as babies. We listen for over a year before we even expected to say anything. So obviously people learning French want to be able to say something in less than a year. But, the more they can be exposed, and we couldn't be living in a better time. I mean, when I first started coaching and teaching, it was very hard to find listening materials. It was very hard to find real books, or that we didn't have blogs, and now we have YouTube, we have films, we have LinkedIn in different languages. It's amazing. I mean, it's all around us. So if you know how to use the tools, and there are loads of apps which are really helpful. So, and most of it's free. You know, it's just looking in the right places. So I love it. I think technology has been a game changer.
So, based on what you said, now I know that you don't work in schools. I know that's not your area, but obviously, you know, a lot of the people listening might have kids in schools who are at this stage themselves. Now, from what I remember of learning languages at school, it was learning how to pass an exam in that
Yes.
language. It wasn't learning how to fully immerse or be comfortable with it. So, you know, for instance, I remember learning grammar before learning actually how to speak.
So did I. Yeah.
Would you suggest that the way that we teach language in the UK schooling system is done in the wrong way to actually help us want to learn and continue languages as we grow?
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of experience in schools, you know, over the past few years. I think it depends on the teacher, but really the national curriculum is there to help people pass exams, and very few people, very few students actually have to do a GCSE anymore, which I can't believe that the government would have done this. It's not compulsory to do a language at GCSE. It's just an option, and with that we're losing more and more language teachers. So it really is something that people will be picking up in later life if they choose to. I think it's really sad. I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, I wish I hadn't learnt the language. I wish I hadn't been able to communicate with those people." So I think it's a really amazing life skill. And as I say, it really deepens your understanding of all sorts of things, you know, cultural references and your own language. It helps you to be able to understand words you might see in a book that have a French root or a German root, etc. I just think it's really sad to shrink the curriculum like that rather than expand it. So yeah, I can't see it going any other way at the moment, because they're still catching up from the pandemic with you know, young people really struggling just to get the core subjects down. So, but yeah, I mean, I once did it was an experiment. I used to use a program called Accelerated Learning. It was a whole program. There was a big book. It had the French on one side, the English on the other. There were 12 cassettes. It was a story going all the way through it. It was very, very brain friendly. There was lots of music. There was classical Baroque music that you listened to some of it to. And I was asked to help some schools in Westminster and see whether their children, whether some of their GCSE students would respond to this. And there was a group in a school, and they put their, I think it was year 9s through this program, and they took the GCSE a year early, and they all got A stars. It was so different from what they'd done before, but obviously it came with a cost. It was quite an expensive program to give to students. It was very different. The first thing I had to do was to convince the teachers to give it a go, and they did. You know, but this was sort of in the 90s. It was a long time ago. But it was so exhilarating to see these students embrace it. And because they were listening to these materials, they became very familiar, and they could just replicate it. You know, they would find that it pops into their head when they're not even thinking about it. And that's how language should be working. You know, much more input than output is needed at the beginning. And, you know, it's like programming a computer, isn't it? You can't expect anything to come out until there's something in there. It's just like children. I mean, I don't say treat learners like children, but remember that they need to hear things before they can say them. And the other thing I often find is people are too hard on themselves. They expect too much of themselves too quickly. I did the Italian course for myself as a test, and I was frustrated that I had to listen to it way more than I expected to. But I thought, I can do French, I can do German, I know Spanish, it should be just very similar. But I could understand it, but I couldn't reproduce it until I had listened and listened over and over again. So repetition creates the neural pathways, doesn't it? It's I heard another quote again today. Something creates the pathways. So it's certainly repetition is what's needed and what is often lacking. We expect to know things after one or two goes at it. So
essentially it's that consistency of small habits and keeping it going, but also removing some of the pressure. I would imagine for adults, just as you would see for children in school, the more heightened the pressure, the harder the learning experience is. Whereas if it's, I'm guessing, from a more playful perspective, it's absorbed easier.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing I do with my adult clients is I find out what they enjoy, what makes them tick, and then I will go and find materials to suit them so that they're actually enjoying it. It's taking away the fear. They understand some of what they're listening to already because it's a subject they know. But once they're familiar with it, the nuts and bolts that we can then look at, the grammar, etc. It's involved in everything. So why not use something that you're very comfortable with? But one thing that is, it still happens. We wait until children are at their most self-conscious, like 11, 12, and then ask them to speak in a foreign language. And some of them will be very, very self-conscious, and and they will fail, or they will see themselves as failing. Some of them fly, some of them are very, very quick to learn, but it can be an excruciating experience. And I still meet people who remember really bad experiences in school.
I am definitely one of those. I still remember my French oral exam, and it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life.
Yeah.
So ironically, I then picked up French as an adult because I wanted to enjoy it rather than
exactly
my lasting memory. But do you hold any credence with the idea that people who are able to sort of learn 5-6 languages, that there's any genetic sort of predisposition behind that, or is that sort of a bit of a myth?
I think the jury's out on this. I think there are, I have come across people who really, really have struggled. And I think it's probably a difficulty with hearing and retaining sounds. So, we all have different learning styles. So there will be some people who are, for example, there are people who find it easier to learn to play an instrument and to hold a tune. There are people who can play from ear. So in the same way, yes, there will be some people who find languages, but they may have just had more exposure as children. So I think there's nothing that anybody can't learn to a certain degree, but I do think there are perhaps some people who find it easier and more natural, but they need the right conditions, but yeah, I have met 1 or 2 people who really struggled. Not many though.
Okay. So it sounds like as long as the why is there, why you're doing it, there's a reason that's motivation enough for somebody to commit, whether it's for work, whether it's for pleasure, whether it's for location and geographically moving, as long as the why is there, then if someone gives themselves that time and they learn in a fashion that is applicable for them, because as you mentioned, we've all got different modalities. You know, I'm very visual, other people are very auditory. It sounds like you would adapt that learning style to the particular person's sort of modality.
Yeah, absolutely. However, I think everybody will have to do the listening, even if you're very visual. But what I would suggest, if you are very visual, is to make more use of having the subtitles. I mean, I will always suggest that you use multimodalities anyway. So you're listening and you're seeing. First of all, see it in English so you know what it means and what's coming up. But then, for example, put the French subtitles on. So then your brain's making the connection between what it's hearing and what it's seeing. And someone with a visual memory like you will then remember, and then you can link what you're hearing with the sounds. And it helps with spelling. It definitely will help you, because as you know, French spelling is not the easiest. With German and Spanish are phonetic. So what you hear is what you write, and that is so simple. It makes everything. Once you know the sound system, you can write anything. And if once you know the sound system in German, and you know that, you know, for example, EU would be pronounced oi, like heute, you can read anything. So I could prepare you to read a speech. You may not understand what it all means, but you'd be able to deliver it beautifully. With a bit of practice.
To be fair, that sounds like most politicians. I don't think they ever understand any of their speeches. And learn them by heart.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for giving us such an insight. And if somebody did, sort of listening to this, did need some help in learning a language for whatever reason, what's the best way that they can get in contact with you?
The best way is on LinkedIn. I always see my messages on LinkedIn, and there's only one of me. So as far as that, unless another one's popped up, I'm the only one. And I can have a good conversation on LinkedIn, and I've got quite a lot of posts up there as well. So that's my favorite.
Fabulous. Well, Lesley's LinkedIn profile will be in the details of this podcast, so go and have a click if you are interested to learn a little bit more. But that just leaves me to say thank you so much to Lesley for giving up her time to be with us today. I've definitely learned a lot myself about the linguistic processes. And thank you to all of you for listening to today's episode. And I really look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thank you.
Happy day.
Pleasure. Thank you.